This is Live Life Love. Hello and welcome to the Live Life Love podcast. Here we are all about living a life you love and living your life full of love, particularly in the digital age. So today I'm talking about habits. It's a classic topic. When you think about self-improvement, habits are kind of the building blocks of that. So I just wanted to give an overview of best practices when making habits and breaking bad habits. So obviously habits are very important. They add consistency to our lives. They give like a sense of control in chaos. And eventually they allow us to act in kind of autopilot for some tasks that help make actual change in our lives. So there are kind of three, I'm calling it three, but types of habits that I'm thinking about here as in terms of like cadence. There are daily habits that you do every single day. In my opinion, these are the easiest to build because they're frequent enough where you're doing them every day. Because you have to do them every day, there's a level of like keeping yourself accountable to complete them, which makes them very easy to build. And then there's habits that kind of exist in other cadences, like monthly or weekly. The longer the cadence of a habit, like if it's monthly, it's going to be harder to build just because there's less repeat ability of it. You're not repeating it as much, so it's not being implemented and solidified in your brain as much. And then there are what I call instinctual habits. And these are essentially trigger habits. It's like putting away the dishes after you finish eating, or saying thank you and please. And most of these you might be like, oh, like I automatically do those. Most people were probably taught these in childhood, but if you weren't taught these in childhood, that's not something to be ashamed of at all. And you can definitely still learn them in adulthood. And you don't have to feel bad about, oh, like I don't put away dishes after I finish eating and they like build up and that's like a super big source of anxiety for me. That's like not something to be ashamed of. And like once you finish eating, you can start to build the habit of putting those away still. And so those are kind of the instinctual habits. And the trigger of like seeing the dirty dish after you finish eating, that would be the trigger there of seeing the dirty dish, should make these very easy to remember. But they are the hardest kind of habit to have accountability for because it can be hard to remember, oh, did I do that? If it's like something that's physically there all the time, then maybe you realize you didn't do it, but it's just a little harder to consistently do them. So those are kind of the three types of habits as far as like timeline goes, but there's also, of course, good versus bad habits. And I take good versus bad with a grain of salt. There's different interpretations of what good is versus bad. And, you want to be careful what you label here. But ultimately, I'm just going to say that good habits help us become the person that we want to be. And bad habits are the things that hold us back and can look very different for person to the point where maybe someone's good habit is someone else's bad habit or vice versa. And it takes effort to build good habits and break bad habits. Unfortunately, it is not quite like an automatic process. Eventually, once you build that habit or break that bad habit, it becomes automatic, but there is that initial effort to make it actually happen. So first, I'm going to be focusing on the good habits and how to make them. And the main thing I want to focus on here is do not do too much at once. I think it's easy to say, I am here right now and I want to be there, especially today. You see, like with social media, you see such perfect idealized versions of human life that are perhaps things you want to strive for. And ultimately, you're probably very, very far from that reality. And expecting yourself to be able to build all the habits to bring you to that end space immediately is unreasonable. And honestly, like, habits can be like a constant thing. Like, things are gonna throw you off and you're just gonna have to keep essentially trying to build and maintain your habits for a very long time. Like, it's very difficult to get them to be super, super consistent. And different life changes might make them harder or make you have to pivot a lot, and that end goal that you even have might not even be achievable. But essentially, instead of keeping all these changes that you want to make, I'm not saying you can't try, so I'm gonna tell you how you can try at least to implement all of the habits that you want to have. And so instead of keeping them as a mental list, if they are just a mental list, I encourage you to first write them down so that you can see all of them. And then order the habits that you view are the easiest that you think you could implement to the hardest. And if there are tasks or habits that are particularly large and particularly hard, it may be beneficial to even break them into parts that are actionable and achievable for you for where you are right now. Because ultimately, you can't go from zero exercise, if that is your current state, to intense weightlifting every day. You will burn yourself out and make it even harder for yourself to build that habit in the future. But you want to make sure that you're still setting yourself up for reaching that final goal. So maybe you say you want to go to the gym 5 days a week, but weightlift 1 or 2 days and do 15 minutes on the treadmill or something very simple and easy and achievable the other 3 days, and then slowly ramp up to that goal of doing 30 minutes of weightlifting 4 days a week with that, still keeping that 15 minutes of running afterwards. Like, maybe that's your end goal, but you don't want to do all of that all at once. And so, once you figured out everything that you want to do and all the steps to get there, go ahead and implement the easiest first. And this might be contradictory to what you have heard in the past of always start with the hardest task first, but I honestly think that the hardest part a lot of the times is just starting. And when you implement the easiest first and kind of do those easier wins, then you've built up the self-confidence to actually be able to go after those harder habits that you want to build and that take more mental fortitude. And, it's all about like momentum here instead of, you can do the hardest one first, and then maybe because you've completed that one, all the other ones are easy. But if you give up on that hard one, you're never actually going to get anywhere. So it's way easier just to do the easiest ones first. And if there are ones that have like a very long ramp up period, like the fitness example that I gave, that's another one that you could try implementing early on, since it will take a while to ramp it up to your full goal there. And if at any time it feels overwhelming by everything that you are doing, then cut back. Establish some core habits before building more. You don't need to do it all at once. You don't need to get to your end state immediately. It is a journey. And the reason why this is ultimately habits are about consistency. And you want to make it so that you can maintain that consistency instead of dropping out and never trying again. And it does take a certain level of resilience that looks different based on what the habit is. For example, if you're trying to wash your face every night, then you have to do that even if you're tired. You really can't make excuses, and you don't want to cut corners. But I do know that things come up in life, and it's not always super easy to go 100% on that habit every single day, especially if it is very difficult. So it's important not to have an all or nothing mindset here. If you fail, get back up. You didn't fail building that habit for all time. It's going to be okay if you missed it a day. You just have to keep be willing to like start over again. And a lot of times it's not even starting over because you're still maintaining, you didn't lose all that time that you were doing the habit. And it happens sometimes if you fail occasionally, but if you find that you are giving up or making excuses constantly, that might be when you need to take a step back and work on building up your mental resilience in doing these things. And if 100% is too much a day, you don't have to just not do it and go all the way back to 0. You can scale back to 50% and you don't need to feel guilty about that. Like if you do not think that you can go to the gym, if your body is just telling you that is too much for me right now to do your like full planned workout, you can go and do half the workout or just go and do some kind of movement that could get you in the gym and trying and moving still. I know yesterday I did not want to do any working out, but then I was like, oh, I would just go watch YouTube videos on the stair stepper. That does not sound scary to me. And I know some people don't like the stair stepper, but I do. So I was like, okay, I will go and do that. And yeah, I, was only up there for 15, 20 minutes, but ultimately it felt way better to do something than just to do nothing at all. Next, when you're making habits, you want to make sure you're setting yourself up for success. A great way is to start with a clean slate and a nice environment. So whether that means physically cleaning your house or cleaning out your thoughts just to mentally prepare for building that habit, or like clean the space where that habit will happen. So if you want to implement some kind of shower routine, maybe clean your shower, make space for the things that you will be using in that shower routine, just to make it as easy and satisfactory for you as possible. And, make sure everything has a place. If you're trying to like make sure you're cleaning up after yourself every day, maybe you first need to do a huge clean and organizing everything to make sure everything has a place before you can actually start doing that habit that's more of maintenance versus the giant cleaning and organizing. And whatever you need to make it easy, go ahead and do that. Like if you're waking up early to work out, make sure that, your workout bag is packed or lay out your clothes so you can just wake up and go if you're not really a morning person. And if you're really having trouble starting, just, make the habit seem as appealing as possible before you start if you have trouble starting. Because starting is the hardest part. And making it appealing can look very different for different people, or having like a designated space to do that habit, or if you need to buy special floss to make flossing more appealing to yourself, go ahead and do that if that's what you need to make the habit appealing. And next, a good way to make sure and, create a rewards structure for the habit is habit tracking, as it creates a level of accountability and a sense of pride of how far you've come, how often you are doing that habit, and it holds you more accountable. If you repeatedly skip something, now you have an actual log of, oh, I didn't do it Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I really need to create mental resilience. Or if you're noticing like some kind of pattern of like why you're not doing something, figuring out ways to create solutions for preventing that from happening in the future. And habit tracking works best with daily habits, like I mentioned earlier, which is a little bit of a downside. It also is essentially a habit in of itself. You have to spend time actually tracking your habits, which doesn't work for everybody, but it is one habit that has exponential rewards, I guess, as it's helping you build even more habits. And if you have a habit that lives in a habit sequence, so that's like, I guess, a routine, I usually call them, like you brush your teeth, then you wash your face, then you get in the shower, etc., etc. So if you have a habit sequence, it's way more helpful to just track that whole sequence, because most likely if you do one of them, you will do all of them. But if you find you're skipping one, then maybe it's more helpful to do the individual ones. Habit tracking doesn't seem like the best way for you to have that accountability. Having an actual person keep you accountable, or like a monetary thing that forces you to do it, can be helpful, like physically signing up for a class or committing to someone else, because it's harder to cancel or let down other people. And that can kind of force you to build the habit. And then eventually you can have that habit on your own without relying on them. So that was all I had on making good habits. Now I'm going to talk about breaking bad habits, which will be a shorter section because ultimately, unfortunately, and honestly, if, a bad habit is like something, so less of like a bad habit of always forgetting to do something, but if it's something that you're actively doing and you want to stop, you may need to just cut yourself off from that thing entirely. Even if it's not intrinsically bad, sometimes cutting yourself off where you physically make it impossible to do that thing is the only way to kind of reset your system and break that habit. So if you have a social media addiction, for example, you might just need to delete your apps for a couple months before letting yourself go back on them if they have become like a very serious bad habit. And the social media example, obviously, that is something that is addictive. And addictive things especially, you may need to cut the things off forever, which is really unfortunate, or put hard barriers to keep you from it. There's so many blocking apps out there that will actively block social media, for example, which I absolutely had a social media addiction for a large portion of my life, and I now have to have very strict controls on it that make it literally impossible for me to spend more than half an hour on Instagram a day. And I am absolutely reaching that half an hour point all the time. And it's not just the blocking that my iPhone provides, but I have to go to external apps that make it impossible to access the app. And ultimately, that's the thing. You need to make it very hard to do that habit, that bad habit, and make it super inconvenient if it is something that you want to keep in your life. You can also turn some bad habits into rewards or like conditional things for your good habits. For example, saying like, I only get to watch TV when I'm on the treadmill. You're going to want to go on the treadmill to watch TV. But I want to iterate here that basic needs should never be considered a reward. This means food, water, sleep, basic hygiene, going outside, pretty much any essential needs of a human being, like hanging out with friends. I don't think those things should ever be rewards. Food especially, you do not need to earn what you eat. When you start to get into that space, it's a very dangerous space to be into like developing an eating disorder. Ultimately, food is made to be enjoyed. If you need to cut back on unhealthy foods, you can make healthy swaps or limit the amount of that unhealthy food that you keep in the house so that you can still enjoy it in moderation. But cutting out food entirely should never be the answer here. Another kind of way to break bad habits is figuring out why you engage in them. Is there some other hole in your life that you are filling with that bad habit? Ultimately, sometimes healing the root cause is all that is needed to actually break that habit. And this can be a very difficult process that involves like a lot of self-reflection and figuring out, why am I doing this thing? But starting that conversation with yourself is often just the first step to healing whatever hole that is there. And then, unfortunately, if the bad habit is associated with a dopamine hit, when you cut that bad habit, you need to be prepared for the emptiness and withdrawal that is going to come as well. There will be a withdrawal period, so you need to be prepared for it. If it's like social media or TV related or sugar related, there is often some kind of dopamine hit there. And so I recommend in that space of whenever you did that bad habit, fill it with something else that will help you feel fulfilled and busy and distract from that emptiness during the withdrawal period. And of course, if the bad habit does involve substance abuse, a greater intervention will be needed, whether that's rehab or therapy. I recommend that you reach out to someone close to you that can help you get that help that you need. And even if it's not directly substance related, if you really try super hard to stop the habit and you can't, then it may be time to seek professional help because it might have become more of an addiction. And there is no shame there. There shouldn't be a feeling of like you failed at breaking this habit or anything like that. There are just some things that people need help from other people for to be able to do, and there is nothing wrong with that. But that is ultimately all that I have today on habits. I know this was a pretty brief overview, and there's so much on habits that I could go into. In the future, I might talk more in detail about some parts of everything. But today, I just wanted to give a pretty quick overview. Today's homework assignment. If you're new to the podcast, I usually have some kind of homework assignment just to increase engagement and make people really engage with the content and make sure it's actually actionable. So today's is just to write down all of the habits that you want to build in your life and order them from the easiest to implement and the hardest to implement, and then go ahead and try to implement the easiest one this week. Thank you so much for listening to the Live, Life, Love podcast. As always, please share this episode with your friends and family. Follow the podcast on Instagram at Live, Life, Love Pod, or visit the website livelifelovepodcast.com. You can find past episodes wherever you like to listen, and new episodes come out every Tuesday. Have a great day.